In a small town along the Texas-New Mexico border, what started as simple mockery at a roadside diner turned into one of the most unexpected confrontations in Rio Grande's history. When members of the Iron Vultures Motorcycle Club decided to taunt an overweight truck driver, they had no idea they were targeting Daniel Beckett, a former Delta Force operative with over 2 decades of combat experience. Daniel had spent years maintaining a quiet life as a trucker while discreetly building a network of fellow veterans who had also chosen a life on the road. These weren't just any veterans. They were men and women who had served in the harshest combat zones, specialists in intelligence, logistics, and close-quarters combat. Over the years, they had built an informal but highly efficient web of support, stretching across highways and state lines, always watching, always ready. That network was about to become the worst nightmare of the Iron Vultures. What followed over the next 30 days would shake the foundations of one of the most dangerous biker syndicates in the Southwest. As threats escalated from intimidation to violence, Daniel and his team used their training to counteract the bikers' tactics, disrupting their supply chains, exposing their connections to corrupt law enforcement, and systematically dismantling their control over small towns along the highways. Through patience, strategy, and meticulous planning, what started as a simple confrontation at a truck stop set off a domino effect that unraveled deep-rooted corruption across 3 states. The Iron Vultures, once feared and untouchable, found themselves hunted, their operations crippled, their leadership in disarray. Their supply chains were cut off, their allies in law enforcement exposed, and their financial operations dismantled with precision that only seasoned military strategists could execute. Daniel and his network didn't just fight back. They turned the tactics of asymmetric warfare against the bikers, spreading misinformation, sabotaging their movements, and turning their own members against each other. It wasn't long before paranoia set in among the Vultures' ranks, fractures forming between rival factions. As their numbers dwindled, so too did their stranglehold on the highways. By the end of it, the once dominant force had been reduced to scattered remnants, their top leaders either arrested or driven into hiding. And it all started with one act of defiance, one veteran refusing to back down. The evening sun cast long shadows over Dusty's diner as Daniel maneuvered his dark blue Kenworth into his usual spot. Every motion was deliberate, practiced, the kind of efficiency that comes from years of routine. At 52, Daniel carried more weight than in his military days, but beneath the weathered ball cap and flannel shirt lay the disciplined mind of a man who had seen and done more than most would ever know. Lisa Calloway wiped down the counter inside, glancing out the window with a familiar smile. For 5 years, Daniel had been as regular as the ticking of a clock. Tuesday nights, meatloaf with extra mashed potatoes. What Lisa didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Daniel's choice of this diner wasn't just about the food. It was about positioning, sightlines, and the tactical advantage of a place that offered clear views of both highway approaches. As Daniel settled onto his usual stool, a fresh pot of coffee arrived, poured by Hannah, one of Lisa's longtime waitresses. "The usual, Hon?" Daniel nodded, scanning the diner as he always did. 4 truckers scattered at different tables, a family of 3 finishing their meal near the window. And then there was Tom Doc Halstead, a retired medic with 3 combat tours, sipping his coffee in the corner booth. A quiet, normal evening until it wasn't. The rumble of motorcycles grew louder as 3 bikes pulled into the lot. Their straight pipes were deliberately loud enough to rattle windows. Through the chrome reflection of the coffee machine, Daniel watched 3 men dismount. Their leather vests bore the insignia of the Iron Vultures. The leader, a tall man with an angular face and cruel eyes, went by Caleb Trask. Behind him, his second-in-command, Leo, lean and wiry with a snake tattoo winding up his neck, and then Jonas, older than the other 2, his face scarred from years of fights. "Well, ain't this cozy?" Caleb drawled as he stepped inside, his voice thick with mockery. "Nice little setup you got here, Lisa." Lisa emerged from the kitchen, her face neutral, but Daniel knew her right hand was sliding beneath the counter to where she kept a baseball bat. "Welcome to Dusty's. What can I get you, gentlemen?" Leo smirked, leaning against the counter. "How about everything in your register for starters?" the few other customers tensed. The father at the family's table instinctively moved to shield his wife and daughter. In the corner, Doc Halstead lowered his paper slightly, eyes alert. Caleb chuckled, resting a hand on Leo's shoulder. "Easy there, brother. We're just here to talk business." He turned back to Lisa. "See, this stretch of highway is under new management. The Iron Vultures are expanding. And we're here to discuss your monthly protection fee." Daniel continued eating his meal, though his muscles coiled, ready. He'd seen this pattern before, both overseas and at home, small groups of thugs testing the waters before making their real move. Lisa's voice remained steady. "This is a family business. We don't need protection." Caleb's expression darkened. "Everyone needs protection. Bad things happen when people don't understand that. Equipment breaks down, deliveries get delayed, accidents happen." Jonas took a step toward the family's table, bumping the back of the little girl's chair hard enough to make her whimper. That was when Daniel spoke, his voice calm but commanding. "The lady said she's not interested." The diner fell silent. Caleb turned slowly, seeming to take notice of Daniel for the first time. Well, well," he sneered. "Looks like we got ourselves a hero." He stepped closer, looming over Daniel's seated frame. "Ain't your business, old man." Daniel took a sip of his coffee before answering. "You're making it my business." Caleb leaned down further. "And just who do you think you are?" Daniel finally looked up, his eyes meeting Caleb's. His gaze was steady, void of fear. Just a guy trying to enjoy his coffee. Something in his tone made Jonas hesitate. Caleb, however, wasn't backing down. "You seem to know a lot about our operation," he said, studying Daniel more closely. "You military?" Daniel gave a small, slow nod. "Once. You're making a mistake." "No," Daniel corrected him quietly. "I'm preventing one." The standoff stretched for several long seconds before Caleb jerked his head toward the door. "Come on, boys. We'll finish this conversation another time." As they mounted their bikes, Caleb pointed 2 fingers at his eyes, then at the diner. A clear warning, they would be watching. Once the roar of motorcycles faded, the tension inside broke. The father of the family approached Daniel. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what would have happened." Daniel cut him off gently. "Nothing was going to happen to your family, not here." He turned to Lisa. "You might want to call Sheriff Carden. Let him know the vultures are expanding into his county." Lisa nodded, already reaching for the phone. "They'll be back, won't they?" "Yes," Daniel answered, "with more of them next time." Hannah set a fresh cup of coffee in front of him, her hands still shaking. "What are we going to do?" Daniel took a slow sip, his expression unreadable. Then he set his cup down. "We're going to show them they picked the wrong truck stop, the wrong town, and definitely the wrong veteran to mess with." He pulled out his phone, dialing a number he hadn't used in years. "It's happening," he said simply before hanging up. The next morning, as dawn painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Daniel stood outside the diner, watching the horizon. The first rigs appeared on the highway, their diesel engines growling like distant thunder. By midday, the parking lot was filled with more than just truckers. These were men and women who had served their country, combat veterans, former special forces, intelligence officers, all answering the call. Each one had lived through battles far worse than anything the Iron Vultures could throw at them, and they had no intention of letting a gang of bikers intimidate their own. Daniel moved among them, shaking hands, sharing quiet words, strategizing. Maps were spread over hoods of trucks, marking routes and fallback positions. They weren't here for a brawl. They were here to systematically dismantle an enemy force that had been terrorizing the highways unchecked. By the time the Iron Vultures returned, they found Dusty's not just filled with truckers, but surrounded by something much worse. Men and women who had spent their lives facing down real threats. The war for Rio Grande had begun, and for the Iron Vultures, it was about to become the longest month of their lives. By the time the Iron Vultures returned, they found Dusty's not just filled with truckers, but surrounded by something much worse. Men and women who had spent their lives facing down real threats. The war for Rio Grande had begun. And for the Iron Vultures, it was about to become the longest month of their lives.